Hello, everyone. This is Mad Cat, the angry egalitarian that discusses this and that. And today is the third part of my series of interviewing the key members of Regarding Men, the three that started the group and do the semi-weekly video. I knew that was going to happen. All right. So I get to interview Janice Fiamengo today, which I'm very happy about, mostly because a moment ago I couldn't say her last name, but now I can. But this is a dream come true. Being able to interview Paul Elam and Tom Golden were also dream come true, but just like Janice is just on equal footing right there. She's a person who came out of nowhere one day and has made an impact on the movement. And I am very privileged to be interviewing her today to give people a reason why they should join Regarding Men. So how are you doing today, Janice?
Well, thank you, Mad Cat. That's a very nice introduction. I hope I don't disappoint you in this interview after that glowing introduction.
Yes, I did set the bar very high, so you will never reach it. Ha, 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 ha.
I'm afraid that may be the case, but I'll do my best.
So, as I've mentioned, this is mostly about reaching out to everyone out there, primarily men, about why they should join Regarding Men as the group online that kind of is a therapy for men, only it's better because it actually helps men. That was a Paul Elam quote, but I agree with it. And one of the benefits that we have in this group is that we have Janice. Now, it's an all-men's group, and then there's Janice. But we actually love having her in there. We definitely agree not to have any women in there as a whole, but we make special exception to Janice because she really wants to be there. She really wants to be there for us and not make this about her. And it's just been so fascinating to actually talk to her like a person and not the goddess that we all make her out to be, because she's quite humble of a person, and I was kind of blown away by that. So I'm this but like I said, this is a dream come true because, like so many of you, I started watching the Fiamengo files and it was just like, wow, she is saying exactly what all of us are thinking. So I'm going to start this interview based on your interview with Paul Elam. And anyone, that's a great interview to check out. Be sure to check that out. But you said something at the end which I found really surprising. You said that you don't like the compliments from those within the men's movement because you feel that what men do about getting out there and trying to be heard is incredibly brave, and you feel that you don't necessarily say anything new. You kind of repeat what a lot of us are saying, such as Paul and Tom and Karen and already people established in there. You're just kind of parroting back what they're saying. Mm-hmm. So my question for you first is the $100 question, if you will. What is your inspiration for doing this? I mean, you benefit from the gynocentric world so much, and yet in many ways you're rejecting that to fight for men. So, and as much as I enjoy what you do, and what is your motivation for doing all of this?
Yeah, that's an endlessly fascinating question for sure. And I knew you were going to ask me that, but I didn't really prepare an answer. I think I do it. I mean, I do it because it is the right thing to do, the fundamental base, because it is right. And I don't understand how any woman looking at the world as it is constituted in North America anyway, in the 21st century, can pretend that the feminist worldview and the gynocentric culture that produced it is accurate. We women are not having a terrible time. We don't need to be propped up and cheered on anytime we, as Paul would say, tie our shoes. In fact, I think that's quite damaging for women, but I mean, that's not my issue. I have never felt, and I'm in my mid 50s now, sorry to say, I have never felt that I was the victim of any kind of negative stereotyping, discrimination, harassment, demeaning comments, sexist oppression of any sort. And this is not because I came from an unusual and enlightened background. I had two very good, decent parents who simply expected that I could do anything I wanted to do if I had the necessary talent and the necessary dedication, of course. They never, let me believe that I could simply do it because I wanted to. They made it clear to me that there would be work involved and self-sacrifice and many, many hours of study and apprenticeship if what I wanted to do was something difficult. But, I grew up with that. That was what I encountered at my school. I had many male mentors, teachers, guidance counselors, employers as I grew up, who all, they just didn't, it was a kind of both a post-feminist world in that the struggle, if there ever was a struggle that of the sort that we're told existed, the struggle was already won. Okay, and I'm talking about 1970. And there was nothing unusually privileged about my upbringing. I grew up in a lower middle class / working class neighborhood, went to pretty good schools, but certainly not elite schools in any way. And, it was simply accepted that as a person of the female sex, I didn't need to be advantaged. I didn't need to be given special encouragement, that I had the right to strive to do anything I wanted. And that I was expected to want to work hard and to contribute whatever gifts I had to my society. So that was that. That was, over 50 years ago. So it's ludicrous to me now to hear over and over again and to read in the papers daily that women are held back in all these various ways, and women need to be encouraged and they need to be given special advantages, and we need to have affirmative action hiring, and we need to change the laws to protect women, and all this kind of thing. And when in fact, of course, any sensible person can see that it is men who are discouraged daily, who experience gender harassment, who are told that they are toxic, who are told that they should step back, that they can't expect an equal share of the world's goods or an equal share of opportunities, who are told anytime they complain about a evident injustice that, it's hard to give up privilege, and who have to read articles like, why can't we hate men? And, by university professors. That just outrages me. And so my parents taught me, amongst many other good things, that I should stand up for what I believe in, and I should stand on the side of justice, especially if it was a difficult thing to do. And so that's what I've tried to do. As soon as it became evident that other female professors were not willing to, and were still going on with the narrative that women are the innocent victims of patriarchal oppression, I decided to start speaking out. And so that was when I, came onto the scene, as you noted, and that was back in the spring of 2013. I gave my first public lecture at the University of Toronto. And I guess I would say that it's stupid maybe to say this, but I still don't think, and I certainly don't think I was then, still don't think I am now, a good public speaker. I really, I wouldn't have done it if I felt that there were many other women willing to do it. But I was surprised at how relatively few there were. And just to go back to what you said originally, it would be a lie to say that I don't like to be complimented. Everybody, I think, enjoys being complimented. It's wonderful to have people say kind things, but I do also feel uncomfortable when people say that I'm courageous, because it doesn't take a lot of courage to be a woman and to say, that men have a tough time of it. It takes way more courage to be a man and to experience all the nasty blowback that immediately comes. And just the final last thing about that question, why do I do it? I don't want to live in a heavily feministic world. I want to live in a sane world where the best people are hired for jobs. And, I don't want to fly in an airplane that has an affirmative action hire. I don't want to go under the knife for a medical procedure with an affirmative action hire. I don't want to be taught by affirmative action hires. I don't want my city to be built or run by affirmative action hires. I don't want policies designed to benefit people because they're deemed to be victim groups who need to be specially advantaged. That just sounds like a nightmare to me. And I do see that has been happening. I sat on hiring committees where better deserving, better qualified young men were passed over, well, young white men in particular, to be completely honest, were passed over in favor of lesser qualified people who fit certain equity hiring targets. And it broke my heart on an emotional level to see these guys who had spent a whole bunch of time and put a lot of effort into applying for jobs that they were well qualified for, thinking that they actually had a fair shot at that job. And this started happening. I first saw it in about the year 2000. I know it had been going on long before that. I was put on short lists with all female candidates. So I was myself the beneficiary of this kind of targeted equity hiring. And it's still going on now. In fact, it's ramped up to even in a higher notch now. You have to fill out, if you're applying for any kind of academic job, you have to fill out a diversity statement. You have the opportunity to identify according to various identity categories. And if you were a white man, it's highly unlikely that you have a fair shot at many, many jobs. And that appalled me then. It was probably the primary thing that rankled, that seemed to me an outrageous injustice that we should be marching in the streets about. And it still rankles now. I can't hear you. Mad Cat. I've lost the sound.
No, I'm just a moron. No, that's spectacular. And I feel like a lot of people have the same feeling, especially women, that they don't want to live in this world where, they want to have the privilege. Well, they don't want the privilege just automatically given to them. They want to work hard. They want to prove themselves. But if, you're not being, I'm working on a project now, and there is a quote in there that if you're not being challenged, you're not changing for the better. Yeah. And if women live in a gynocentric world where everything's handed to them, they'll never really change who they are. They will always be in this perpetual state of basically a child.
Yeah, a kind of child. Yeah, it to be given things that you didn't earn in the name of social justice or boosting one's self-esteem. It's a psychological minefield, in that it not only doesn't force the person to earn whatever it is that they want or now already have, but it reinforces the belief in their own inadequacy, at least at some level. And then in order to compensate for that sense of inadequacy, at least if the person is smart enough to realize that the position they've been hired into or the thing they've been given is in some way beyond their capacity, if they are smart enough to realize that, it's a terrible feeling, and they're going to have to make up all sorts of imaginary grievances and reasons for why they're not really able to do the job fully, or they aren't contributing as much as others are contributing. And so then that leads into more fantastical imaginings of grievance and oppression and discrimination. In some cases, the person may not even be smart enough to realize that she, or he in some cases, isn't smart enough to do the task or to accept the honor that they've been given. But that just fuels resentment and illusion of different kinds. And it's just it's just a recipe for all sorts of bad feeling on the part of the person who is being given what they don't deserve, what they haven't earned, and on the part, of course, of everybody else who sees the injustice of, people being rewarded not based on merit. And I witnessed that for years at my workplace and saw it getting worse and worse. And yeah, it's a terrible thing.
So I'm going to take a step back from all of this. I mean, I do love hearing about your perspectives and all of that, but I want to learn a little bit more about yourself. And I want to start with you being a professor. And was this, when you started college, like day one, was that what you wanted to do? Or was it something like somewhere along the line you made the decision to do? Like, what was your major initially, or was that your major initially?
Yeah, I would say that I probably, like, from the time I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to do something to do with English literature and writing. I think initially when I was 11, I wanted to be a creative writer. I wanted to be a great novelist or something like that. And then I kind of gave up on that, although I did take creative writing classes at school, but I gave up on that to a certain extent because I found it stressful, actually. If you want to be a great writer or any kind of great artist, you have to, that consumes you. That becomes your whole life. And especially, at least I know, wanting to be a writer, it meant that I lived everything at one remove, and that I wasn't ever just living things. I was always thinking about how I would write it at the same time. I can see why writers go mad. Every experience I had became fodder for, how I might turn it into a piece of creative writing, whether it was a poem or a short story or whatever. And I found that really stressful. So anyway, so I decided, okay, maybe, and I didn't think I was that good anyway. By the time you're in your late teens, early 20s, if you've got what it takes to be, a great artist, I think you already have some inkling of that. And I wasn't convinced that I had it. So I thought, well, the next best thing would be definitely to, because of course I love to read. I was an only child, and that was how I spent every night of my life, basically from age 7 till I started college, was reading reams and reams of books, nonfiction and fiction, but especially fiction. And so I thought, what a wonderful thing to be able to study that and share it with other people. And so when I started university, I was already majoring in English. That was my best subject in public school. And at that point, I think I wanted to be a high school teacher. But then as I went on, I thought, well, why not aim even higher? I'd like to teach at a college level or a university level. And so I got my bachelor's in English, then I got my master's in English. I stopped for a while. I taught as a sessional instructor for a number of years. And I thought, why not just keep going? Why not go and get a PhD? and just see, what would happen. And at that point, I had no idea. There weren't very many people being hired into academia at that time. But I thought I would love it anyway. And I did love it. I loved seminars. I mean, that was intellectually, that was my favorite time of my life, probably. Intellectually. I mean, I've had other wonderful times too, since I got married and everything. But at that point, I knew how to be a reader of literature and a reader of texts, as we said in those days. And I loved sitting around the seminar table, talking with other people who are also interested in the same things, and arguing about meaning, and arguing about why meanings mattered and in what context they mattered. That was so exciting and wonderful. And so I was really looking forward to going on and being able to do that as a career. And it just seemed so wonderful to be paid for that. And then I was lucky. I was hired into a permanent job, a tenure track job at the University of Saskatchewan almost immediately upon graduating. Well, I did what's called a postdoc fellowship too. And then in 1999, I was hired into a full-time job at the University of Saskatchewan. And then I taught there for 4 years. And then I went to the University of Ottawa and I taught there for 16 years.
I will admit that, I really love story. I'm very fascinated by it. Kind of more self-taught in many ways, because I don't feel that I really got too much from school. And I'm been questioning whether or not that was because there was some sort of feminist indoctrination that, like, on a subconscious level, I could pick up on and just kind of reject it. But I get so, pardon the phrase, turned on by plot and character building and world building, especially. So
yeah,
I will say that one of my dreams is to just be able to sit down with you and discuss some stories sometime. I know I've told you this, and you lead a pretty busy life, but one of these days, just pick a story and then we just talk about it. So that's one of the things I want to do one day.
It's a wonderful thing to do. It's a lot of fun. And I wouldn't be surprised if your contention that perhaps feminist ideology was already part of the, whatever teaching experiences you had or experiences as a student, that may have turned you off. Hold on. Sorry, my phone is going. Yeah, because it did enter in, like by the 1980s, feminist ideology was already one of the dominant approaches to reading literature and literary criticism. By the 1990s, I think it was the dominant approach, along with other kind of ideologically oriented approaches, post-colonialism, anti-racist theory, Marxist literary criticism. All of those really dominated the academy in the 1990s. And so for those of us who were primarily interested in stories as ways to talk about being human in, a whole variety of ways, from a non-political, non-ideological angle, all of that sort of pleasure got crowded out by these critics insisting that everything was ideological, and that that even your refusal or your lack of interest in ideology was itself ideological, and usually evidence of your privilege, as a white person or as a male person. I think, well, it's a whole other subject, but in many ways, these ideological approaches completely destroyed the study of literature, as well as the study of, art and many, many other subjects in the academy, by making everything ideological and by simplifying everything. It eventually became that in English literature, the only kinds of questions that got asked about the literature, and these, even the greatest works by Shakespeare or Milton or Wordsworth or Pope or whomever, the only questions that were asked were, does this text is it complicit with dominant ideologies, capitalist, heteropatriarchal, etc.? Is it complicit with those ideologies, or does it resist those ideologies? If it was complicit, it was to be condemned. If it resisted, it was to be celebrated for its resistance. And that's the only thing that really could be talked about. And if you objected to that, that's because you didn't care about social justice, and you would be shamed into silence. And so it became, the study of literature just became a kind of watered down social justice politics endeavor. And the joy of creating worlds and talking about what made those worlds powerful and how they related to our own experiences in our world, that just that became an amateur a hobbyist's interest, but it had nothing to do with the academy, unfortunately.
And it's interesting how it seems to have started in academia, but permeated through the rest of society. Like, one argument I hear every now and then is, well, how many, like on your bookshelf, how many of your books are from female authors?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one, there's quite a few female authors on my shelf. But I don't really give a shit, in all honesty. All I care about is, and I have, like, on my top shelf here, I don't know how well you can see this, I have a lot of writing help books. And some of them are female, some of them are male. And then, I have some men's rights stuff. Most of them are male, but there are a few females. Hell, I have Christina Hoff Sommers here. But I don't give a shit if Christina Hoff Sommers wrote that. Yeah. I bought it because I want the content inside. And yet, like with the whole Sad Puppies incident, I think that was 2016, where they voted based on political ideology of who the author was and not what they wrote. And that's why they gave a lot of no awards, because, it's a white male. Well, we don't want to vote for that person, so we're going to demonize them. And so no one wins.
Yeah. No, it's.
And I really feel like that started in academia, like you were describing.
No, it definitely did. And once it started, it was impossible to stop. Because I think academics have always, well, not maybe always, but certainly since the 1960s, I think one can make the case that academics were pushed back on their heels, feeling that in some way they needed to justify what they did. It didn't seem very sexy to say that you specialized in 15th century French poetry. Even if you went on to say that you specialized in that poetry and that it was worth reading because it articulated the joys of love, and it imagined the transporting power of pure love. Or you could be interested in things that are very important to human beings and that human beings have always cared about, but that was not nearly as sexy as saying that, yes, you were interested in 15th century French poetry, but you were interested in its politics of resistance against oppressive elite structures, and that you focused in particular on 15th century French poetry by marginalized women, and you looked at the tools, the rhetorical strategies that they employed in order to make their voices heard in an oppressive patriarchal system. Then that was really sexy. That sounded like you were doing something really important. And so I think people who had wanted to simply study something that was beautiful in order to have a deeper appreciation of why it was beautiful, both in terms of content and form, they were quite quickly made to feel that what they were doing was of far less urgency than that other more, political and socially oriented kind of study. And so everything fell. It became impossible to do anything but that kind of ideological stuff. And then it became more and more vicious. And professors were told that they had too many white men on their course lists, and students marched saying they did not want to learn the Western European tradition because it was supposedly exclusionary and it was sexist and racist and imperialist, etc. I met people. I remember one woman, very nice woman in some ways, but who told me that she, on a point of principle, didn't read male authors because I don't know why, they were male, and she didn't want to pollute her moral imagination with things that men had to say in literature. And like the deliberate refusal to cut oneself off from so much of value in literature is astounding. But that is considered an acceptable point of view in academia as it now exists. It's weird.
So I pulled out a book. It's called 45 Master Characters. And I use this when I create characters. It's actually a very good book. But the woman who wrote this is a staunch feminist. I mean, she basically admits that she wrote this book initially to try to just make female archetypes. And then as she was doing it, she decided to reinvent the whole system of male and females. And it's fairly balanced. But there's also another part in here where she talks about the Messiah character, the male version and the female version. And what she specifically says in here is where both the male and female think they're right about the message they're giving, the male Messiah tends to be wrong, where the female Messiah tends to be right. I mean, this is related with feminists. Yeah. But I still use it because I find it useful. And, as long as I ignore some of the more feminist, it's still a very good book. I mean, heck, I love that I'm a little bit challenged by this. And there's a lot of great insight in here. But if I had that mentality of, I'm not going to read this because a feminist wrote it, then I would miss out on the other great parts this has. So I find that so comical that someone would arbitrarily choose not to read something on the basis of it. I mean, there are some books that I'm not going to read. Like you gave me something by Julie Bindel or something, or I don't remember what the book was. It's in my notes somewhere, but it was like, I'm not going. Actually, I might read that book just to see. But if it's just like just hate, I'm not going to read it. But if there's something useful in there, I'm going to. But I want to change topic, and I want to talk about your male students. And in your interview with Paul, and I think I've heard you talk about this a little bit elsewhere as well, is that there was multiple things in your academic career that eventually woke you up to the idea that feminism wasn't all that was cracked up to be. But you've mentioned that it was seeing your male students in your classroom, and I was wondering if you could expand upon that more about what was it about your male students that kind of signaled to you that, wait, this doesn't really match up with what feminism tells me.
It was a gradual process, and I would have to say that probably by the time I started teaching at the University of Saskatchewan, so teaching full time, I was already, I guess I would have still called myself a feminist at that point, but it would not have been first. I would have identified myself as a literature, a story lover, an animal lover, different things before I would have said feminist. Whereas when I was a grad student, I was exhilarated by the idea. Feminism to me meant, being radical and, being interested in liberation. And at that point, I was under the sway of feminist ideology, in that even though in my growing up years, like I said to you already, I had no experience of victimization of any sort at all. And, I lived in I just didn't think about those things. I didn't think politically about my experience at all when I was a young person, as a child, as a teenager, even in my early 20s. And so, the embarrassing thing to admit is that it really wasn't until I was fully an adult and started into graduate school in, my mid 20s that I was really seduced, I would have to say, by feminist ideology. And as a result of that, I went back through all my experiences, as feminists are encouraged to do quite explicitly. In my mind, I went back through my experiences to think about how I could make them fit the feminist narrative of oppression and marginalization and, being aware of myself, excluded from masculine society, all these kinds of things. And so I was kind of convinced by that, because it felt good in all sorts of ways. It is a wonderfully freeing kind of ideology, in the sense that nothing is your fault. You don't have to take responsibility for anything that's wrong in one's society, and you're the agent of purifying change as a woman, as a marginalized other. You've never done anything wrong because you've never had power. And you, of course, will use power in much more responsible and ethical ways than those who have had it up until this point. So I had stopped really believing that, I think, by the time I graduated. But it was probably, it still had an influence on me. And so I think it was. And it's hard to say, honestly, how all this happened, because it was gradual. But I know that when I started seriously teaching full time at the University of Saskatchewan, starting in the fall of 1999, I was actually embarrassed by the elements of feminist theory that I still had in my teaching. And this was not, I wouldn't say it was even like really radical, man-hating, women are wonderful victims, sort of proselytizing. But I think there was still that, I would talk about how, this woman that we were looking at, who was born in the early 19th century, I would frame her work as a poet always in loosely feminist terms, in a way that I would not do for a man. He would never be seen as overcoming obstacles, as heroically striving to make his voice heard, etc. There was always a kind of double standard. And so it was always a little bit part of the feminist narrative that women are valiant and, women are overcomers, and they should be applauded for what they have achieved because they achieved it against odds. Whereas men have, a kind of implicit, always, even if I didn't phrase it in this way, they always have their male privilege. And of course that, I knew that wasn't true even then, because I could see in reading about all these different writers' lives, everybody has their struggles. And, nothing is as simple as any of these social justice narratives. But it really wasn't until when I started teaching that I started to feel this deep embarrassment, really, about conveying anything like that to my male students. And I guess I really intensely began to imagine the feeling of sitting there, even for one class, and being an 18-year-old guy. And I was teaching in Saskatoon. A lot of my students were first-time university attenders in terms of within their families. A lot of them came from farm families or other sort of working class families. These were not elite privileged people. Either the men or the women, young men or women, but certainly the women encountered an environment where they were encouraged through and through. Nothing bad would ever be said about a woman, no matter what area of academia she was interested in going into. If she was going into STEM, wow, that was incredible. There were programs to support her. You know, there were special scholarships to reward her for going into STEM. If she was going into dentistry or into health sciences, whatever it happened to be, she'd be encouraged to do so. Men didn't have any of that anywhere. Men were minorities in many of the areas that they were studying, and certainly in English literature. You know, it was about 75-25 female to male. I think it's been always probably female dominated for a long time, because it's one of the things that female students are especially interested in. But certainly they were minorities, and yet they had to sit there, not just in one or two classes, but in pretty well every class that they took in English literature and in art history and in sociology and in criminology and whatever they happened to be studying, history, certainly, religious studies. And they had to hear that feminist narrative. And it just struck me as obscene that they had to hear that women brought good things. And women had to be encouraged because women made the world a better place, and men had consistently made the world a worse place. They had brought war, a social division, oppression, competition, and nothing ever good said about those young guys who had, even if it were true, you know, that this was the case of history, which I didn't really believe by that point either. But even if it were true, these guys were certainly not guilty of it. They'd had no hand in oppressing anybody. You know, and yet I couldn't understand why so many of my colleagues were happy to teach that way. These guys just had to sit there, class after class, month after month, year after year, and listen to how their sex was responsible for everything bad, and they should step aside and let their sisters take over, who were surely going to do a better job of running the world. It just struck me as obscene. And I even knew professors who saw it as part of their feminist agenda, which they saw, of course, as a pure and righteous agenda, to give more encouragement to their female students, even to grade them a bit higher, allegedly to make up for, you know, the obstacles that women face, the sexism, the daily sexism that they had to struggle with. I could see it in their attitudes to their students, and even sometimes in the way they marked students' papers. I used to go around, those were in the days where we used to post our final grades on our doors. You're not allowed to do that anymore. And I could see that male students tended to be marked a little bit lower, even though I knew some of those students and I knew that they were excellent. And then, of course, I had the experience that I already told you about of witnessing affirmative action hiring year after year after year. We hired, I think, 5 new professors into the English department during the years that I was at that university. And I saw how qualified male applicants were being passed over, and that was it. That was the end of feminism for me. And I would just look out at these young, innocent faces of these guys and think how atrocious it was that they had to bear the blame for even 1 second for things they had never done.
Yeah, a lot of what you're talking about there is going to be seen in my upcoming book, Boys and Men's Issues Handbook, about education. And it's so well, it's not surprising to me because I see it all the time, but I imagine it's going to be quite surprising for so many people that basically the worst thing you can do as a man is go to college.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be you couldn't, if you wanted to be successful, you had to go to college. Now I'm telling men, stay away. If you're going to go to college, go online.
Yeah.
But we're running a little short on time, so I want to go ahead and just move on to my next question. So what you do say that you don't feel that your necessarily brave because you have the privilege of being a female, and everyone wants to hear a female speak versus a man speak about anything. But I'm going to slightly disagree with you, and I do think that you were brave because you did actually go and talk. You're a professor in predominantly a feminist world, and you chose to speak about men's issues. And this eventually caught up with you with the Human Rights Tribunal. But my question for you is, what was the process in which you went from being a teacher to being a speaker? I know you said that there weren't that many females in this, and that's why you started, but what was it that actually got you to that stage?
It took a while because as I say, I had stopped being a feminist, and really, I think even had become an anti-feminist by the time I left the University of Saskatchewan. That was in 2003. And yet I never spoke in public until 2013. So there's a whole 10 years in there where I was, and things were happening. Of course, I was busy in my career and everything, but I was starting to read, not exactly men's issues. I probably just reading, anti-leftist, anti-social justice books, and thinking about the ideology of social justice in general, of which feminism, of course, is the dominant strand. Thinking about all of its illogicalities and the way in which it, affirms hatred and really normalizes hatred and gives haters a pass because they can claim that they are fighting against, centuries-old injustices. And so I was thinking about all of those issues and gradually incorporating them into my, just the way I thought about things, into the way I taught literature. And of course, all this time I was living in an environment, the academic environment, that was, that justified the rankest unfairness. And so, my resistance to that grew every year. And I saw very intelligent and otherwise very nice people, most of them, not all, but many very nice people complicit in the grossest unfairness because of these ideologies and because they had come to believe that they were doing the right thing by discriminating against people on the basis of sex and race. And it wasn't until the fall of 2012 when I saw who turned out to be my friend Steve Brule, but I didn't know him at the time. I saw his video about Warren Farrell being protested at the University of Toronto. And so that was the moment. I saw the hatred of the students. I saw the way in which these ignorant young people who had never read a word of Dr. Farrell came out, instigated by their professors, to prevent young people and older people from attending a talk about the boy crisis and all the work that Warren Farrell was doing researching the boy crisis. And, that was when the double standards of our society at large, and especially of academia, really hit me, because I thought, wow, imagine if there was a feminist professor or writer coming onto a university campus to talk about the troubles and the difficulties of girls, in adolescence or whatever it happened to be, if the subject was the girl crisis. And just imagine anybody trying to prevent people from going to the talk. They blocked the entranceways. They tore down the posters advertising the talk. They swore and cursed at people waiting to get in to see Warren Farrell's talk. They berated them. They called the security officers and police there pigs. And I mean, it was just a foul spectacle of hysterical rage based on no understanding whatsoever. And at that point, I just thought, this has got to be spoken against. And I got in touch with the organization that had arranged the talk. And I said, if you need somebody to talk, or if you need somebody to be a mentor to young men at the University of Ottawa, I would love to do that. Even just to sit with young men and say, you're not crazy. If you think that you are experiencing injustice and bias and unfairness, I would love to confirm to them that they are not wrong, that really does exist. And I was so angry about it. And the organization, which was the Canadian Association for Equality, they invited me to give a talk the following March at the University of Toronto on, I think it was called What's Wrong with Women's Studies or something like that. And I talked about the double standards of feminist ideology. And I talked about why I didn't think women's studies should be an academic discipline at all, because it has absolutely nothing to do with objective research or with looking at a subject from multiple points of view. It's all about ideology, and therefore it doesn't belong in universities at all. And unfortunately, universities have become more and more ideological in the 8 years since I gave that talk. And unfortunately, it's infected everything now. So that was the beginning. And then there was no looking back, because after that, I got this flood of emails from people who had attended the talk, mostly men. And I'm sure I had an experience somewhat like what Jordan Peterson had a few years later, although, not quite to the same extent, of course, but like just the number of people saying thank you and telling me their stories, talking about the barrage of misandry and hatred and the lack of encouragement, the blame that young men have experienced both in the wider world, but especially at university, and just how horrible that had been for them, and thanking me for being, one of the few voices that actually spoke out against it. And so, that I might never have done another talk if nobody had ever contacted me. I didn't think the talk was particularly, you can still find it on YouTube. I didn't think I did a very good job. At that point, I knew almost nothing really about men's issues in particular. I was an anti-feminist, but I didn't really know, I'd read a few books. I'd watched maybe one Karen Strawn video. After that, I started watching a lot more, of course. I didn't think I answered the questions very well or anything, but this flood of emails made me realize this is like the most important thing I can do with my time as an academic. This is a really important, urgent thing. And I'm right about the injustice, even though nobody else or not that many other people in academia are willing to talk about it. So that started me on the path.
So let's go ahead and talk about regarding men. And of course, you do a video series with Paul and Tom, and they have great things to say about you. And they, in the previous videos, we've discussed how this group has come to be and how they really enjoy just meeting you and talking to you and brought you in on all of this. And now you are perhaps one of the luckiest women in the world because you get to be in a men's only group. And I think that there's a lot of women out there who would love to be in that position, whether they're some sort of researchers, whether they're feminists who want to get all the dirt, or other women in the men's movement who really want to understand. And you get to see, men raw. You get to see men where we don't have to project anything because we're too afraid that if we say the wrong thing, there's going to be like a bunch of feminists at our door. And while we can't go into specifics because we're very big on privacy in this group, I would love to know what your experience as a woman is being the only woman in a men's group. Has it gained you any new insights into men, or has it confirmed a lot of what you already knew?
Well, both, I think. I mean, it has confirmed what I first discovered when I got those emails following the first talk that I gave. And then it's added to those insights that I had from receiving those emails. And I think the main thing, and I do consider it a privilege, I really do, because it helps me to speak as a woman in the men's rights advocacy movement. It helps me to speak with a little bit of authority that I wouldn't otherwise have about men's experiences. And I think the thing that really strikes me is, and I remember that Paul Elam once said this in an interview, that feminists started a gender war whenever it was, like 50 years ago, and men never fought it. So it was this one-sided war. And if one lives in a feminist culture, one gets the opposite narrative. One gets the narrative about the war on women. There are all sorts of books with that title. One hears all about men's hatred of women and the plot, either conscious or unconscious, to make women's lives miserable or at least subordinate to men. The idea that men have organized society for their own benefit and to the detriment of women. And as I say, I never had that experience, but talking to men has been astounding overall over the past 8 years because of the lack of anger and hatred. I'm not saying that there isn't any anger. There certainly is some justified anger, but the men at Regarding Men and the men that I hear from on emails, there's a lot of sadness. There is bewilderment. Like, what happened? Why am I supposedly the bad guy when I've never done anything to deserve such calumny? And there's an honest wish that gender relations could be placed on a better footing. And there's still an interest. I find that remarkable. I think if I were a man of my age who has lived my entire life being told that I'm toxic, that I need to apologize for my privilege, that I need to step back and give my sister a better opportunity than what I have, if I'd been hearing that all my life, I would be absolutely irredeemably bitter by now, and I'd be out for revenge. And the thing that I don't notice in the men that I get to speak with is that kind of bitterness. I see specific angers about certain kinds of laws, certain kinds of experiences, but I see a really open-hearted, sincere interest in getting past the war and having a society where both men and women work together to make the best society. I cannot say that I see that amongst feminist women or even women in general. There are certainly lots of, individual good women around. But if you get in a woman's group, they love to bitch and talk about all the things that their man does that irritates them, or that men in general do that irritate them. I just don't get that from the men at Regarding Men. And I find that impressive. And that's kind of the main thing, I think. I really admire that, the lack of bitterness and the continued interest, even after all these decades, of getting past it to something better. And I love that about men. And I think that is kind of a masculine quality, just wanting to solve. If there's a problem, let's solve it. Let's figure out how to deal with it, and let's move forward. Let's not dwell on the past or dwell on personal experiences. Let's make things better, and then, enjoy the thing that we've made better. I think that's a masculine thing. It's something I love, and something that I love about my husband and my dad. And it's why I want men and male energy and male ways of being to have their rightful place in the world.
I think that is so profound what you're talking about there, because, one of the many complaints we see in relationships, well, women want to talk about the problems, but men want to offer solutions to the problems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want solutions. I just want to talk about it.
I
And
just
it's like,
want to vent.
and us men, I mean, I know I'm a problem solver. I hear a problem and I want to solve it. I've kind of learned when talking to people, just mostly they want someone to listen to. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, when it comes to society, men see a problem, we try to fix it. We try to improve upon it. We try to innovate it. And it's not to say that women don't innovate themselves. There have been plenty of women who have contributed to our society, but more men than women, in all honesty. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes me nervous on the things that we're seeing in academia, where they're trying to dumb down STEM fields in order to encourage more women in them. And it's like, oh, good. In the future, nothing's going to work.
Mm-hmm. Bridges are going to fall down, and and we won't even be able to talk about why. Yeah, it's scary stuff. And you and I think, even corresponded about this. I mean, I think a lot of feminism and the anger and bitterness that are attached to it have to do with the fact that feminism makes these completely unrealistic demands, where women will say things like, I want a world where I'm never catcalled. I want a world where no man ever looks at me like a sexual object. I want a world where I'm never condescended to as a woman. And there never will be a world, because a lot of it is very subjective, what they consider to be condescension or sexual harassment. So that world will never come into being. And, any intelligent person thinking about it would know that. And that's part of what fuels feminism, because, of course, feminists don't want feminism to get to the point where they have to admit that their goals have been achieved, because then there'd be no more feminism. And for a lot of women, that would mean they don't have an identity anymore. They don't have jobs anymore. So feminism is built to sustain that sense of aggrieved, bitter anger. And it's pretty corrosive. And I just don't think men in general are into that. For most men, that's a waste of energy.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation we had on that. And we were talking about literature, actually, what started it about, I think it was the Old Man in the Sea or the Old Man in the Fish, whatever. And I was thinking about the catcalling. There was a woman, I think she's on Guardian or something like that, where she always writes articles about how oppressive society is because she's catcalled. Mm-hmm. And then she wrote an article, I hate the patriarchy because I miss getting catcalled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's Jessica Valenti. Yeah.
Yes, Jessica Valenti. I can never remember her name, even though I think it's such an awesome name, too.
It is. Yeah, such a waste. Yeah. She could be a really great, vivacious Italian sort of woman.
But you're definitely correct on that the big thing I always say is that feminists don't want to admit that all of their problems are solved because it's a business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if they admit that they have more than anything they ever asked for, they have to stop getting money, because there would be no need for feminism. So they continue to say, there's a problem, send us money.
Yeah. And it's a mindset too. And it's one can never underestimate the satisfactions of that victim mentality. It brings great pleasure and satisfaction and sense of purpose. And so to have that go, even more than the money in some cases, I think would be really disturbing to a lot of feminist women.
And yet the funny part is that women could still have that and still be relevant all at the same time by starting to embrace some of the things that men's rights is doing. Saying, oh, feminism has always cared about these things, and like shared parenting or genital mutilation. If this is as much a feminist issue, a female issue, as it is a male issue. And I'm not even talking about female genital mutilation, but male genital mutilation. One of the reasons why it was done was to reduce the chances of women getting an orgasm. That's as much as a woman's issue right there. And yet feminists, if they took it on, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this, I shouldn't give them any ideas, but they're not going to watch my channel. But if they did it, they could become relevant in a whole new way. And yet they're not going to do that.
But that's not the sort of relevance that many of these women want. They want the relevance. They want the special status of moral purity that comes with proclaiming oneself a unique sort of victim. And the other side, the sex, the oppressor sex, as not victimized at all, as entirely privileged and powerful. They have to maintain that binary opposition in order to maintain the pleasure of their victim identity. So they're not going to be giving that up in any hurry.
So that draws a close to our video today. This has definitely been a treat for me, and not just for Janice, but being able to talk to Paul and Tom. Well, to be fair, I hadn't really known of Tom until I joined Regarding Men, but he's a great guy. But both you and Paul, I've watched for so many years, and it was just like, I got to talk to my heroes, and we became friends, and it's just such a great thing. And I am especially thankful for today because I got to really ask you some of the questions I've always wanted to ask you. And I hope it inspires other people out there, especially to join Regarding Men. And I know this is a little bit of a shill, but, you know, it's important. The things that we're doing there is so important. I wish I could tell you what I get out of it, because I do actually get quite a bit. I mean, I put a lot into it, and I get a lot out of it. But I just check it out. I believe the lowest tier is about $5. You still get access to a lot of things, but
everything.
It's regarding.com/join. You get to talk to Janice, you get to talk to Paul, you get to talk to Tom, you get to talk to me, which some people seem to like. I don't know why, but you know.
And if you can't afford it, you can still join. There's no financial barrier. If you can't afford it, that's no reason you can't join.
Yeah, just reach out to Tom or Paul and let them know that you might have some financial struggles.
Yeah,
and they will work something out with you. We are trying to get some sort of scholarship going, because we don't want those who can't join to be precluded from it, because we're not out here to make money. We're out here to help people. It's just we still got to pay the bills, you know.
Yeah.
But like I said at the beginning, this is therapy for men, except that it actually works. And this, I need this, in all honesty, because, you know, I've tried looking into therapy, and it's like $300 a month for something online, and I don't even know if the woman they're recommending to me is going to tell me that all of my problems because I'm a privileged man.
Yep, that's the problem. Yeah.
So I do recommend checking it out. Just give it 1 month, and I think you'll be blown away with it, that you'll be there every week. But is there, I want to turn this to Janice if she wants to shill. Is there any ways that we can see anything that you're doing? Any websites or YouTube channels?
Oh, well, I'm just in the process of signing up on Gab after going off Twitter and Facebook a month ago. So I might be up there sometime in the next couple of weeks if you want to find me there. And I'm going to be making some more videos that my friend Steve is going to post at Studio Brûlé. So you can look for me there too. That's it.
All right. Well, I thank everyone for coming out. Doesn't look like there's too much in the chat. Apocalypse Diamond Sparks, I really didn't understand your question, so I apologize. Good to see you, Wikipedia Snippet and Troll with Purpose. and non-humanitarian anti-feminist. So thank you for coming out. I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, and thank you, Janice.
Well, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
It would help if